But we had other thoughts or questions. Maybe want to. You're calling people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just calling people to say stuff. You got to do that.
Glasses back here.
Okay, so we're trying to make a game, and we use extra credits as basically required watching for learning a lot about what we have to do. And we've been having a debate over whether or not to use 2D or 3D. Some people in our group are really want to do a 3D game because that's the kind of games that they love the most. They feel like that's the most immersive and they really enjoy them. Others are more hesitant because 3D is a lot more difficult. And we want to start with the 2D and maybe do a 3D later. We were wondering if you could help us with that debate.
So, one, it depends how much you know. If you've got people who really know 3D inside and out, it depends on your team composition that you want to do. I would start small, and I would start 2D. On the other hand, if you're using something like Unity, there's the asset store. You can buy, for not very much money, a lot of what you need to get something good. Just whichever one you choose. So I would recommend 2D personally. If you have people who are good 2D artists or are capable of doing 2D art. Okay, I'm going to take a step back. I would recommend things which are boxes as your first game. Boxes are easy. Boxes that anyone can do. I don't care whether or not you do them in 2D or 3D.
Actually,
Right, Thomas was great with boxes. And I just scope small, keep it to 5 minutes, go even look at some of the short flash experiences that are really good, that get lots of people noticing, and get it completed, right? Don't get hung up on these initial things. Just make sure that the scope is small enough that you can see the path from here to the end and all the steps in between. And then after you've done it, once you have a lot better idea of how to make that decision for the bigger product. Don't begin the bigger product if you've tried it once and you have some information about it.
And one thing I'll add to what James said too is that usually the game necessitates it. And you kind of know. There's some exceptions, obviously. And if it's right on the edge, you definitely go 2D. For example, if you're making a first-person shooter, that doesn't really make any sense to make it 2D. But
except for Doom and Wolfenstein.
it's built more. It's a 3D environment.
Right,
This
all the
day and
parts
age, it doesn't make sense.
Right, so you still have to only build 2D, or you don't need to make those 3D.
Right, but you still have to do something like programs too.
But you don't have to do 3D models.
I've got a suggestion.
Focus on strength.
Like, why not? Like, why don't you get the guys who want to do 2D and the guys who want to do 3D
And
have
Thunderdome.
Okay, this one doesn't work out Thunderdome, but
Real quick, I'm kind of interrupting to answer a question that was over here, sort of. These guys can do their thing however they want to do it, but basically this panel is going to continue until about 5 a.m. because around midnight it's officially my panel, and it's basically just this. Except a little less formal. So let these guys do this with their thing, and then it'll slowly break down into separate conversations, and then like eventually they'll probably escape, but Chris will stay here with me until 6 a.m.
So, on that note, never got to finish. I mean, we got to Thunderdome, but anyway, why don't you get the people who want to do 3D choose like the 3D game that they most empathize with, the thing that makes them believe that 3D will give them an immersive experience, and get the 2D people to also find a 2D game that also would bring an experience, and then just have each side play the other side's game and kind of take notes and figure out why 3D does immersion the way it does and why 2D can also do immersion the way it does. And so, you kind of start a conversation and all of that.
I think Thunderdome will work better.
Okay, Thunderdome would be pretty good though.
Every Thunderdome will film it.
That's how you can do fundraising.
This is brilliant. I love this. I would watch it.
Many years experience. I started in 3rd grade. I got patches in the Linux kernel. I've done virtual memory performance analysis for a living. Quite the damn goofy game.
Again, following what he was saying, sorry to disagree with you
pretty strongly, but so far I've been a part of 4 different projects. The first 3 were all very high-minded. We all had really big goals. One theoretically might still be going somewhere. Everything else is crashed and burned. And those were all 3D. The ones that succeeded, though, were when I was part of a game development club. I was actually running it at Piedmont Community College down in Charlottesville. And it was small, very, very small 2D games. One of the only ones we produced was called Don't Shoot Cats, Shoot Apples. No joke, all it is cats and apples fall from the sky and have a little rotating turret, and your goal is to shoot the apples but not the cats, because the cats explode. That's literally it. That's all.
Wait a second. Why wouldn't that shoot? Get a hold of the oatmeal very quickly. Need some copyright infringement going on? That's crazy. Millions of dollars for exploding cats.
All right, another question.
Orange shirt.
Oh, me?
Yes.
Okay.
So back to the earlier topic about like people not understanding games. Do you think that maybe the reason we're having such a hard time describing games is because we don't have a full grasp of how to describe emotions in general? How it's like there's all different kinds of happiness or sadness, and when we play games, they're about having emotions and experiences, and we don't know how to translate that to. We just say like it feels good. When we try to describe how it feels, other people get entirely different ideas of what that emotion feels like. So when we're trying to, the communication is getting messed up because we don't know how to understand like the very things like emotions in general.
It might also be that the people that generally are going to be saying that, like, saying these things about games and why they don't like them, they're probably not super experienced with games. And the experience they have is the very, like, foundation layer, like, okay, lots of shooters, lots of everything else. And so they're seeing that reel going in your head as you're trying to describe to them the emotions like sadness and longing or all these other things. And they're not seeing a connection between the things the video reel they're playing in their head and what they've seen in GTA and everything else and what you're saying. And so it does not make sense to them. So there's not a lot of, like, frame of reference for them.
It's like the emotion, it's like you play games for different reasons or for the emotions you're having or why you play or why you enjoy certain different games. Since we can't like describe ourselves, it's like, and when we get private about that too, it's like we don't want to say like all the things we feel about something, and it gets really like lost in translation a lot.
We also don't have a lot of practice.
Yeah.
Because, for example, we'll often shorthand and say an FPS is fun. An FPS makes you feel powerful and adept, right? That's very morning of the FPS design. That was our goal. But we don't state that, right? We don't have the training. We're not used to talking in that manner. So I think that's part of the problem too. But I'm sorry, I interrupt you. When I'm tired, I get super interrupty. Everybody just re-interrupt me if you're talking.
You're actually hitting on the exact same point. I was going to mention that we don't have the language established that other mediums have, where people have been writing about films and books and art for hundreds of years in some cases, and there's an established language and words that are used to describe things. And gaming is still such a new medium in a way. It's still a baby. It's still very young. We're toddlers in the scheme of things.
Even wine tasting has that kind of language established. Even wine tasting has that kind of language established.
Exactly.
I think it's
One thing to add to that is that gaming has really been around. It's one of the oldest forms. Look, deer play games. A lot of other animals play games to avoid predation and other things. But it's things that are relegated to children or armies, war games. Yeah. So those two areas have a vernacular for it, but we don't as adults.
Right.
And even within like medium that have that additional language like film, even depending on the individual you're talking to, there are still plenty of people who you can try to use those terms when people describing a movie, and they'll say it was good or bad, and that's literally as far as they couldn't even explain why. So in some cases, that even that may not help.
Right, and I was gonna go on to say that, well, like from my experience, like from subjects I've touched into learning, I found that like sorry, so like as I understand it, I actually learned a whole lot about video games from like researching spirituality actually. And it's a strange kind of like realization that when there's this group of people that are trying to understand like, emotions in general and experiences, and the way they understand it is like something I see is actually incredibly invaluable for video games as the entire genre. that like no one's discussing it. No one thinks that emotions are that hard to describe or that we're generally understand them. But I think that after diving into that, it's such a crazy, complex idea of understanding your mind and consciousness and potential ideas about the entire universe in general. And then you realize that games actually can be very spiritual experiences, and it's something no one really has ever, like, I've never seen that discussed. And I actually think it could be really more.
Well, so it's funny that you say that because when I was coming up in the industry, I mean, there were no video game programs in universities, and before I started, really focusing on like game audio and audio technologies, I started off in game design and game production. And myself and a lot of my colleagues, Richard Lemarchand, who did the Uncharted series at Naughty Dog, were philosophy majors.
I'm a classics major. I mean, everybody I know.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, I minored in classics.
There we go.
So, because philosophy, teaches you how to think and analyze and logic systems
Yeah,
and
like
level
how to
design.
have control over things. Like in a game, we have control over a character, and we get this immediate feedback when we collect the point. Oh, I did that. I had the control, and I was able to control my existence. And it's like that's what spirituality actually teaches a lot. And it's like this kind of realization that a lot of people that I know don't actually feel like they have a lot of control in like their life. And it's really interesting how I was seeing all these connections. And I think it's like such a deep topic to like try to make all these connections.
There's a game that I heard of at an earlier panel that I think might actually be what you're looking for. It was at the Obscuratory panel on obscure games. Oh, well, yes.
Yeah.
What was it called?
Eastern Temple something?
Eastern Temple. Eastern Mind?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was a lot about that panel, which was really interesting, was that...
It was the game where if you were immortal, you lose. Or it's like, because it's
immortal.
about dying and reincarnation. And it was so crazy how obscure that was and how big the game was. I was like, I do want to get my hands on that. It sounds really hard though.
Yeah.
Except the copy was like $500.
Do you get a physical copy?
Eastern Mind, the Lost Picture.
Yeah, that's it. And
Thank you.
It's like, it just feels like a very unexplored area that I think could have a lot of answers at home.
The only reason we haven't tried it is we talk about these credits panels. I mean, if you want to get into making games or making anything, you have to have more world experience. I mean, like, there certainly is nothing wrong with like going straight into like a degree for like computer science and stuff. You want to get into like designing games, but I've heard from so many people that the perfect minor to go with almost any degree for any reason is always psychology.
Yeah,
And there's a ton of minors like that. Where
like not only psychology, that back to the extra credits episodes where like, I was a little controversial with the discussion of fate in video games. Fate, not fate. Fate is it's certainly like also a topic that people are so different on. No one has a clear grasp of what it is, and that's why we argue, because we all think of it as something, but we don't have ways to describe it or communicate it or how to like really like express that. And I think that it's just those are my thoughts.
Something that I think you and I have talked about this kind of stuff a lot, and we go for hours, but something that I think creates a huge disconnect is how intensely personal that spirituality is. It's an individual experience that can be hard to convey, and it creates that disjointment in media because you're trying to share your personal experiences. The artwork you create is you, but other people are going to interpret it differently, and so it creates a difficult conversation.
Well, sorry, I just want to make a quick comment. Just on again on the line of the argument that you were making about like psychology class, taking different subjects. I'm a giant proponent of that. So when like my students come to me and say, hey, I want to take a psychology class or a ceramics class or a philosophy class or an anthropology class, I'm like, that's terrific. Because the way I see it is that being narrow, it's not good for you as a person, it's not good for the industry, and even like looking just at something like the field of like video game audio and like sound design itself is a very multidisciplinary field. To be a terrific sound designer, you don't want to just study audio production and engineering. You want to like understand, of course you understand acoustics, but then you want to understand literature, and fine arts, and sculpture, and psychology, and philosophy, and anthropology, and ecology, and storytelling, and bring that all in to your sound design. That's what makes a great narrative. And the folks, you know, sometimes there's a lot of stagnant stuff going on in game audio, and it's because too much of being narrow-minded. So we've got to think outside the box and study everything and bring in a lot of our experiences and really start to break through barriers.
And I think in general, like, we don't realize we can be narrow-minded on the subjects because we have a whole like worldview of a subject, and we don't like we see everything in it. We think it's complicated enough. We can't even fathom it. Shifting the paradigm to something much bigger than what you can realize. It's like I think games have that way of like teaching that, like of like making you perform or like making you experience like something you realize bigger, different perspectives.
Well, and I think that as we craft them, it is absolutely our responsibility. I mean, our job as developers is to create experiences, and you can't do that without having experiences, without understanding the human experience. And so, as much as we focus on the technical side, it is another aspect we need to focus on. But I want to make sure we get to some other questions.
All right, this side. You, sir. Yeah, let's keep
I ruined all my slides.
Let's do the current series on making your first game has been really great. A lot of good information there. But for somebody like me, I went through a gaming program. I've made a bunch of games already. But now I'm out of college, I'm looking to make my first, for lack of a better term, professional game.
What programs did you use? What programs did you use to make games? Which program did you use?
Well, a lot of them. I did not use any one. But yeah, like for my first professional game, how do I, like, what advice from that episode, how do those episodes apply to somebody like me?
So the fourth episode in the series we're doing right now, I think, will be much more useful. So 2 more weeks, I think. But preview time. Okay, so
Sneak peek, yay!
So you're looking for as an independent developer.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the game you're thinking about.
Okay.
This is the first part. I need you to have that, right? Because if you're going to talk to media, because as an independent developer, you're going to be doing all this. You need to understand what's different and compelling about your game. This is going to be one of the first things. And so I'm going to kick you because I want you to succeed. And so don't take any of this as hard. I think you're in the exact same place as so many people are. It's awesome that you're asking, and it's great that you're already working on your first professional game. That's amazing. So with that, again, and take your time, think about it. What is, now that I've bought you some time, especially because I'm blabbing, tell me a little bit about your game. Tell me on whatever's different about it, because in general, as an indie, you're going to need some way to separate out from everything else. If you're making a arena top-down shooter or whatever, it's going to be hard to stand out. You need some other piece that's really going to grip you.
I'm going to try and make a top-down horror game where I lie to the player as much as possible and get away.
All right, awesome. So my next question is, what platform do you want to play with?
Currently PC.
Okay, so define PC, because there's a lot of things. Are we talking a downloadable XE? Are we talking Flash? There's a lot of different ways we can split this out.
Steam is probably going to be my first response there if I can navigate that.
And this is one of the things you need to be thinking about. If it's your first professional release, you're going to have to figure out, okay, how is it that I get from game? Right? That's where I want to do it. Is there a different avenue? The only reason I do Flash, right? They're playing indie developers, super media, right? Flash game before it was anything else. He builds an audience there, and then his path to getting through all these barriers is to say, hey, I've gotten 100 million people to play this game already on some other server. So you really have to think about something. But okay, So we're going downloadable hex. What is your target audience? Who do you think this game appeals to?
That's a very good question.
And that's okay, right? And especially because if you're doing something innovative and new, sometimes you won't have answers to that, but it's something that just put on the back burner of your brain as you're building this thing out over the next couple of months, because when you craft your, in Steam, you get like 3 screenshots and maybe a paragraph of text that says to get somebody to want to buy your game versus to move on. And as a small indie, there's literally dozens of games a day. And so you need to understand when I'm crafting that text, part of this experience is understanding who it's for, right? What human being am I trying to create an experience for? Because we're not creating that experience on the screen, we're creating an experience for the person sitting in the chair in front of the screen. Okay.
Keep it on the back burner. Definitely don't let it control the entire design of your game.
Okay.
Remember?
So next thing is, how many people are on your team?
Working on that. It's a complicated thing. I'm hoping to have, I do know it's going to be a fairly small team, probably no more than 5.
Okay, and I think that any more than about 4 or 5, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this with student teams and that sort of thing where you may not have the management skills. It just gets too complicated. You think, I know plenty of people who think, oh, we're going to grab 20 people, we're going to make an awesome game. Those games always fall apart. 4 or 5 person team is much better, even if it's small. Really figure out early who's focused and who's dedicated to this. It's harsh, but fire early. Everybody is better off if you let somebody go who's not really pulling their weight, because they're going to feel bad about it throughout. They're going to drag the project, all of it. It's just cleaner and better. And know it sucks, and know it's horrible, and know it sounds like you'll be happy for it, and they'll be happy for it. With these people, really start digging in, figure out their skills, and you have to build this project around your skills. Whatever initial design you have, make sure your initial design is flexible enough that you can modulate it a little bit to fit the team you have and the time. How much time do you have? Can you work on this full time, this first thing, or do you need a job as well?
I definitely need a job as well at this time because I still like
Right, again, no, it's no problem. And that's totally fine. Just make sure you don't, it's very easy to lose focus, it's easy to let the rest go. This is what you're passionate about, this is what you really want to do. That goal is going to seem really far away. Make sure you find some way, whether it's scheduling or some other personal solution, to make sure that you are moving those goalposts forward every week. It's very easy to let 1 week turn into weeks, turn into 2 months, and then your product is right? Maybe even put somebody who has who can commit to it full time, if they're good at scheduling and management, to be the person who kicks you to do more work, because it's going to be hard. Right? What you're doing, you're saying, I'm going to take on a full-time job on top of a full-time job. And that's great. I mean, you'll do it. If that's the case, you may want to, again, create a smaller experience, because you will learn a great deal just from shipping a game in the first place. How to go through mainline, how to do marketing, how to get into funds, right? I have to start an LLC, and all these.
If you don't mind.
Speaking of how. This is great. It's doing it.
No, there are, when someone comes to me, I want to start on this project, here are the things you have to have. 1, figure out who's going to own it. If it's you as a person, that's fine. If you don't have money to incorporate or LLC or whatever, that's fine. But figure that out and know what your options are. Where do you live? Where do you live?
State, Virginia.
Okay. I don't know about Virginia's location. No, that's fine. I can't say, oh, you should do that. Figure out what your options are. It's corporate and LLC, in partnership with your people, and you all have some sort of stake in it. Figure it out. If it's not, even if it is going to be everyone gets a share of it, you need to have a copyright assignment contract and get them to sign it before they start doing anything at all. So you or the company or whoever owns this thing owns the everything. Otherwise, even if they give you everything later on, they can take it back after 35 years. And that might not seem like a long time. Donkey Kong was released almost 35 years ago. Imagine if you get back a Mario. And how much money you would have to get Nintendo to pay you for those rights back. Get a non-disclosure agreement, because you're telling someone this sounds like a cool idea. You can't protect that idea. And if you tell someone all about your game, they can go do it themselves and put a story on top of it and grab their own stuff, and you have nothing to do about that. Unless you haven't signed a contract, but you promise never to do that. Never. Also, do you have a name for this? It's okay, no. Fine. When you come up with a name, trademark search. This can be, I'm going to Google it first, make sure you see who's using this in what context. Go to Patent Trademark Office, uspto.gov, and do a trademark search. Just put it in, see what comes up. Think of a synonym, put those in, see what comes up. If there's another game on that that's been using for 5 years, you never find out, pick a different name. If there's something really similar, pick a different name.
The person's last name, pick a different name.
Yeah. So, and this is really good advice in a lot of ways. I mean, honestly, more than even just Mario, that you may get lucky, you may make Mario. But the real issue to me that I've seen come up with a lot of students is they don't do this, and I advise any students that work with all this sort of thing. Because imagine you get these 5 people, right? And 4 of them are great.
I get them all the time.
There we go. But 4 of them are great. And one of them, after 3 weeks, gets a job offer from Microsoft and decides, I'm going to go after them. Do they own 100% of your company? Right? Forever? Because they work on it for 3 weeks? Make sure that when you build the corporate structure, you have all that worked out. Because if you do that up front, then it's really easy. Everybody just points the picture and says, yeah, that's what happens. Okay, I happen to back at 20%. Sure, fine, I'm going to give you my extra. If you don't have that written somewhere, then you guys are starting fighting about it. And it's ugly, it drags down the whole thing, and it's just way simpler when no one has any interest, and there's no conflict to establish all that.
As a colleague said, you're happy and hungry. You're happy because you have a great idea, you're going to do it, it's going to be awesome. You're hungry because everyone's broke, you haven't made a dime off of this yet, so you haven't started. And that's the time to do it.
Be careful and really think it through if you're going into business with your friends.
Yeah.
Very, very careful.
It's probably our bottoms and going to visit friends that come on TV. Like on TV, every time people go and do things with their friends, it always ends in misery and mishaps.
It depends on the situation with friends. But
Get the contracts back. Yeah, what I've heard is from friends who are making companies together, like, well, we all love each other, we're friends. We're like, well, now you are.
Right.
But wait till like money starts coming in and other things happen. You're like, oh no. And sure enough, when it happens.
It always ends in underground.
So Empire on Blast is exactly like that.
Probably, yeah. So a couple of other quick things. NDAs, I agree that you should absolutely have one. It makes you seem professional. I am going to give you the opposite. Don't worry, you are too small. If people want to steal from you, they will. And you have nothing to do about it. So you are actually better off. Show it to publishers, show it to people, show it to, if there's an indie developer who might be willing to tweet about it when it comes out, show them your game, get them into it. Don't worry, don't be afraid of people stealing it, because if they can make it faster and better than you, they shouldn't be.
One caveat, you should at least understand NDAs, because if you go to talk to publishers, or you go to start to talk to more people, many of them will make you sign one. I can't count how many NDAs I've signed, probably, I don't know, a couple dozen a year.
You're not allowed to tell us.
Yeah. Like, you want to make sure that it has a good limit, like 3 to 5 years. If they say you have to keep this secret for the rest of your life, that's an undue burden, so it makes it weak. There's all sorts of, he can give you a much better.
It might even be valid, so both signing it and writing it up, it has to be reasonable, because we don't want to be able to make a living. You're not allowed to work in this field, you spend all your life in it for the rest of your life. No. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't matter if they sign it in blood, it doesn't matter.
And I mean, there's a lot of other things like what jurisdiction legislation, any arbitration is going to go to,
Yeah.
also. But I mean, honestly,
Read your contract.
read any contract that's given to you. You will not have the money or resources necessary to fight you. Right? If you want to quibble over the various NDAs, you're going to just blow through it. Especially, I would love to see that when you go to my esteemed colleague. So do it, absolutely. Read your contracts, know your contracts, get a good NDA, but also don't be so afraid because there's so many people who know keep the product secret, don't show anybody, and then when it's either not ready because no one ends up having seen it and having given them feedback, or it's not ready because by the time it's ready to release, no one cares, no one's really heard of it.
Don't be afraid to cross out things in contracts or negotiate them. If someone presents you with one, that doesn't mean it's written in stone. Fire access, great example. I walked in there one day with another guy from George Mason. Both of us, they handed us the NDA, and we both said, wow, this is awful. We can't sign this. At least, we marked it up, we had like 6 different things each, and there was not a lot of overlap. We're like, this is the worst NDA we've ever seen. And the lady said, wow, we've been using this for 15 years. Nobody's ever complained.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. Oh, why is that in there? Oh, I guess this is a modified form we used 10 years ago. I guess no one noticed that was in there. Okay, no problem.
All right. So because I know that there's some of you guys who are building these games, I don't want to spend too much longer. But we can return to this in 20 or 30 minutes. I will answer the second half of your question because I think it's really good and it's really important that we talk about how you build your first game and then how you launch your first game. But all right, let's get a couple more.
My time to shine.
I had a question about actually history.
All right.
I was actually talking to you the other day briefly about actual history. I was wondering first, what kind of, can you tell us maybe what period you want to talk about when you finish the movie?
Not up to me.
We already voted on it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys know, but anybody who's part of the Patreon, the topics are voted on by you guys. I will create a small list, and then the Patreon subscribers also create, and we raffle all the suggestions from Patreon. We can put that on the list, and you guys vote for it. So the
South Seas Company.
Yep, South Seas Company's next.
We just agreed on Zulu.
That got into the vote, and now the vote's between that and
So yeah, like
It ended last night.
Oh, did it end last night? Wow, man, awesome. I am, what is this? True. By the way, just a funny story. I actually said to him and to Soraya, who does a lot of coordination, and who many of you guys people know, I said, I love the idea of Super Empire, but man, I kind of hope it doesn't get pulled because I know nothing about it.
Actually, that's a good lead into the second part of the question. You guys post the source material?
No, and the reason I don't, no. Because I want you guys to dig into it. I don't want you to go to my sources. I don't want you to, and I know there are plenty of people who will just copy and paste that list onto their high school paper or whatever. I want people really digging in, and so I'm happy to post this. You can find those sources, right? You go to Amazon and you look up some Open to Die, and you look for a couple of things that are highlighted with you. If you want, you can find those. You can find better things, more things, and things that interest you specifically. If I give you books, you'll get a couple of books that I'm interested in. If you will dig into it, you will find so many better, more interesting, more personal sources for you. I'm thinking about doing though a list of other media which gets you interested in this topic, right? So if you like this thing Open to Die, films and games, right? Play Kessen, watch Kagemusha, read, there we go, and Hagakure, and heck, Shogun. And so, right, I'm thinking about doing lists like that to get people more interested in the topic, but in terms of really digging into it, I want to get more people actively digging.
Yeah, extra history by design is the starting point.
Yes.
So yeah, if we can get more people starting to do that, crumb trail of finding more stuff out themselves, then good. That's the idea.
That is the goal.
Just to jump on that real quick, do you guys use more primary or secondary sources?
So, I like primary sources for ancient things. Some of the numbers you'll hear in ancient history, for battle sizes and stuff like that, you'll see that modern historians actually believe are lower. Sometimes I will modify it down, but ending up with a classics major.
I was a classics major too, sorry.
Right, and so I like those sources, I think, and some of the stories that will come from may have been debunked by modern history, but if it's in the primary sources, I will sometimes turn to it. I will always tell you in lies if it's been directly debunked. I haven't used anything that's been truly just completely. But I will also turn to secondary sources where there aren't enough primary sources. Tragically, Sengoku Jidai, right, there weren't a lot of primary sources in English, or that even translated into English, and so much of between the secondary sources were this one guy, this Turnbull guy. Like, and if you go to the Wikipedia pages, you will see over and over this same dude.
It's all one guy.
And what's even worse is, then you tell me every once in a while there's another guy, you read it, and then you're like, you just read this other guy.
Welcome to history, man. It's all one big circle jerk.
The truly terrible part, right? I was reading this, I was thinking this myself, I was reading somebody's thing, I was like, man, you just read this guy, rearranged what we did, whatever, and I was like, oh shit, I just read this guy.
Do you know how many papers I've written in like the past 3 years that have been, oh man, source is great, source is great. Then I looked at the sources in another book that I'm using. Jesus Christ, it's the same source!
There's two different thing because when you're looking for sources, they're going to reference other sources. So you can reference those sources. And if they reference the same source like 3 times, then that's a good source.
Sometimes it might be the only source.
Yeah, there's a tragic lack of sources here, but still, yeah, and so for any people who don't know, the next extra history series is going to be South Seas Company. You guys always pick things which are hugely obscure. I'm so excited about this one, but it was surprising.
Yeah.